Welcome to Cinematic Recaps. This movie is called Zodiac. The film tells the story of the manhunt for the Zodiac Killer, a serial murderer who terrorized the San Francisco Bay Area during the late 1960s and early 1970s, taunting police with letters, blood-stained clothing, and ciphers mailed to newspapers. The case remains one of the United States' most infamous unsolved crimes. Sit back and enjoy to see what happens.
The film begins on July 4, 1969, with the second attack by the Zodiac Killer.
The killer calls 911 and confesses his crimes after shooting Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau on a lover's lane in Vallejo. Mageau survives, but Ferrin dies as a result of her injuries. 4 weeks later, the San Francisco Chronicle receives a letter authored by the Zodiac. There is an encrypted letter contained, as well as a demand that the letter be published or the Zodiac will kill again. Similar demands were made in encrypted letters to the Vallejo Times and the San Francisco Examiner. Paul Avery, a crime writer for the Chronicle, immediately begins to investigate for the paper. Robert Graysmith, the Chronicle's political cartoonist, notices the encrypted letter. A history teacher in Salinas, California, eventually cracks the encryption. However, there are some untranslated letters, and Graysmith begins attempting to decode them, drawing Avery's attention. Along with the new symbols, there is one that Avery describes as a gun sight. In September 1969, the Zodiac Killer confronts and stabs Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard in Lake Berryessa in Napa County. Shepard is killed in the attack, but Hartnell survives. Zodiac then writes to the Chronicle again, calling man the most dangerous game of all. Robert recognizes the phrase as one from a film based on the book The Most Dangerous Game. Soon after, taxi driver Paul Stein in San Francisco is shot and killed in the city's Presidio Heights region. Detectives Dave Toschi and Bill Armstrong of the San Francisco Police Department are assigned to the case, but the killer's actions, whom they do not know is the Zodiac at the time, appear odd. Soon after, the Chronicle receives a new Zodiac letter, complete with a piece of the cab driver's bloody clothing. In the letter, the Zodiac also indicates that he intends to attack municipal school buses. Toschi and Armstrong are soon coordinating with other detectives, including Jack Molinox in Vallejo and Ken Narlo in Napa, to analyze the evidence on Zodiac. While the SFPD was able to obtain a partial fingerprint from the taxi cab crime scene, Narlo describes how a ranger inadvertently damaged the crime scene in Napa. They did, however, discover wing walker boot prints on the ground, with the footwear only purchasable with a military ID. Armstrong wants to interview Michael Mageau, the survivor of the Zodiac's second killing, but Vallejo PD informs him that he is no longer in town. The various police departments are also having difficulty communicating with one another, considering that much of the material evidence must be sent via postal mail. Avery and Graysmith, as well as Toschi and Armstrong, dispute the Zodiac's motives in their own private conversations. The cab driver is his first non-couple homicide, causing the two sets of men to believe he's attempting to break his pattern. Soon later, the Zodiac, or someone claiming to be him, demands to speak with famous lawyer Melvin Belli on an early morning talk program. A man with a deep voice who goes by the moniker Sam phones in. Sam accepts Melvin's invitation to meet at a church in Daly City. Melvin and the SFPD race to the area, but Sam is nowhere to be found, and it is quickly established that the caller was from a mental facility. Even Brian Hartnell, a survivor of the Zodiac's third homicide, says that the voice is not that of the man he met at Lake Berryessa. Another letter arrives soon after, taunting the cops and containing instructions for making an explosive device. Following this, Avery and Greystone discuss their fascination with the letters. Greystone discusses how his love of riddles drew him to the task of deciphering the Zodiac's ciphers. He also describes a number of alternative codes he discovered in the letters, including one referred to as the Zodiac alphabet. The Zodiac writes a letter to Melvin Belli for Christmas in 1969, and continues to write letters to the Chronicle during the spring and summer of 1970, taunting the authorities and claiming credit for a number of incidents. After Avery questions the Zodiac's veracity, the Chronicle decides to stop publishing the letters. Paul also tells Graysmith that the gun sight sign on the letters appears to be a rip-off of the symbol for the Zodiac watch brand. Avery writes several unpleasant stories about the Zodiac and is rewarded with a personal letter from the Zodiac, as well as a piece of the cab driver's bloody shirt. Paul tries to learn more about the Zodiac and meets with an unknown source in Riverside, California. Avery believes he has discovered evidence of the Zodiac's first murder victim as a result of this, predating the 1969 shooting of Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau. Tashi and Armstrong are dispatched to Riverside to investigate. The evidence appears to be comparable, but they rule out an identical match to their killer. However, Paul Avery's stories sway the majority of the audience, irritating Tashi. Avery's article quickly draws a slew of people to Tashi and the SFPD, many of whom claim to know who the Zodiac is. One of the interviews, about a man named Arthur Lee Allen, sounds particularly intriguing. Tashi, Armstrong, and Mullinox then question Arthur, but they find nothing tangible. They interview numerous members of Arthur's family, who provide handwriting samples for analysis. However, an analysis of the letters by handwriting expert Sherwood Morrill reveals no correlations. Tashi eventually learns through Arthur's relatives that he has relocated to Santa Rosa. The Santa Rosa Police Department issues a warrant, and Tashi and Armstrong search Arthur's trailer. They discover a bunch of firearms and confront Arthur when he returns home. However, after obtaining a new handwriting sample and inspecting his prints, none of Arthur's matches any of the information on file for Zodiac, upsetting Tashi that his finest lead had failed to materialize. 1975 is 4 years later. Gray Smith has remarried and started a family during that time. Meanwhile, Paul Avery's sanity has taken a hit since he has left the Chronicle to work for the Sacramento Bee. Dave Tashi is taken aback when his partner Bill Armstrong informs him that he is leaving Homicide and joining the Fraud Division. The Zodiac has remained silent at this time. When Graysmith's wife Melanie discusses all the Zodiac material he's amassed over the years, Robert pays Paul a visit and expresses his desire to publish a book about Zodiac. However, Robert's expectations are dashed when Paul informs him that he no longer has any information on the murderer and chastises the curious guy. Robert then approaches Dave Tashi. Though Tashi pretends he cannot assist Robert, he quietly advises him to contact Ken Narlow in Napa. Narlow authorizes Robert to examine the Napa Police Department's evidence in the Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau cases. Robert then tells Tashi that Darlene seemed to have a lot of admirers, and it's probable that the Zodiac was one of them. There were also odd phone calls made to a number of Darlene's relatives on the night she was murdered, with heavy breathing on the line, leading Graysmith to assume the killer knew her. Robert claims he has to find Darlene's sister, but Tashi suggests he contact Melvin Belly. Robert pays a visit to the lawyer and, during an interesting conversation with one of his housekeepers, learns that the Zodiac spoke to her. Mr. Belly was not at home, so the Zodiac told the housekeeper that he had to kill because it was his birthday that day. This evidence allows Robert to narrow down the dates to the 18th through the 20th of December, and while Tashi suggests he contact the Department of Justice for information, he doesn't get much help. Soon after, Robert receives a call at home from a man claiming that the Zodiac's real identity is Rick Marshall, and that a man named Bob Vaughn has film canisters containing evidence proving Rick is the Zodiac. Robert also visits Sherwood Morrill to discuss fingerprints and handwriting samples. During the conversation, Sherwood describes how a man named Wallace Penny informed him that a man named Rick Marshall was the Zodiac, surprising Robert by revealing that the man who called him also spoke to Sherwood. When the San Francisco Police Department gets its first Zodiac letter in 4 years, Tashi is summoned. However, some suspect Tashi fabricated the letter, which leads to his dismissal from the Homicide Division. When Robert approaches Tashi, Dave refuses to answer any questions concerning Rick Marshall. Robert then travels to Napa and meets with Ken Narlow. Narlow describes how he interviewed Rick Marshall but was unable to obtain fingerprint or handwriting samples from him. In an attempt to locate Marshall, Robert contacts Morrill and obtains Wallace Penny's phone number. Wallace gives Robert a poster he claims Rick designed for a silent movie theater. Morrill investigates it and notices some minor parallels to Zodiac, but more material is required to review it. Robert's life has been dominated by the case by this point. He loses his position at the Chronicle, and his wife flees with the children, fearing that the Zodiac will attack their family. Someone has also called Robert's phone number, paused, and then hung up. Robert continues to seek assistance from Darlene Ferrin's sister Linda, but he also seeks assistance from a Bob Vaughn. Vaughn used to know Rick Marshall as a theater projectionist, but when Robert mentions the posters they're searching through for evidence, Bob argues that he drew all of them, not Rick. Robert rushes out of the building, unsure what to think. Robert then goes to see Darlene's sister Linda, who is imprisoned. Robert inquires about a painting party he heard about, where a man was making Darlene feel nervous. Robert is confident it was Rick Marshall, but Linda swears it was someone else named Lee. Robert is confident that this is Arthur Lee Allen and rushes to Tashi's house in the middle of the night to inform him, and the former murder detective eventually agrees to a meeting. The two walk to a diner, where Robert points out several items that could connect Arthur to the Zodiac, but Tashi insists all he has is circumstantial proof. Some speculated that the Zodiac was someone Darlene knew, since Arthur resided close to her place of business. Though Tashi believes he cannot prove any of Robert's allegations, he urges him to finish his book on the Zodiac. The timeline then jumps to December 1983. Robert enters into a hardware store in Vallejo and runs into Arthur Lee Allen. Gray Smith walks out of the store without saying anything. Mike Mageau meets with officials in 1991, 8 years later, and is shown a number of mugshots. When asked which of the guys is most likely to be the Zodiac, he selects Arthur Lee Allen. In the closing credits, we are given the following information. Arthur Lee Allen died of a heart attack in 1992, before he could be questioned further by the police. A DNA test conducted in 2002 did not match a partial sample gathered from one of the Zodiac letters. Dave Tashi retired from the San Francisco Police Department in 1989 and was later cleared of the charges that he had forged the 1978 Zodiac letter. Paul Avery passed away in December of 2000 from pulmonary emphysema. Robert Graysmith still lives in San Francisco with his children. The mysterious phone calls he received also ended around the same time that Allen died. And that is the end of this movie. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for daily updates of movie recaps like this. Comment what movie you want next. Thanks for watching.